The loan, 100,000 taken out in my name. My credit destroyed. My trust? Gone. I remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. Not the slow dawning suspicion, not the nagging doubt, just a single voicemail from the bank, polite and robotic. This is a courtesy call regarding your recent line of credit. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. I hadn't taken out a loan, but she had. By the time I pieced it together, her side of the closet was empty, her toothbrush gone. Her car vanished from the driveway, and the money, every last cent, had been drained from the account I didn't even know existed. The worst part? She wasn't alone. Her ex, some guy she swore was just a friend from years ago, had disappeared the same day. A coincidence? Number A plan. I sat there, staring at the bank statements, my hands shaking not from anger, but from something colder, deeper. This wasn't just theft. This was a betrayal so calculated, so personal, that it made me question every word she'd ever said to me, every touch, every promise. And then, just like that, the shock hardened into something else. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I met her at a coffee shop, of all places. Not some dramatic encounter, just two people reaching for the same sugar packet. She laughed, I fumbled an apology, and that was it. I was hooked. Her name was Lana, and she had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room. 6 months later, we were living together. A year after that, married. At first, everything was easy. She was warm, funny, the kind of woman who remembered how you took your coffee and noticed when you'd had a bad day before you even said a word. We built a life. Small, but ours. A rented house, weekend trips, plans for the future. She talked about opening a bakery someday. I believed her. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the cracks, the way she'd sometimes go quiet for days, her phone face down on the table, the way she'd deflect when I asked about her past. Once, I found a stack of unpaid bills shoved in a drawer, and when I brought it up, she cried, "I just get overwhelmed, you know?" And I folded, paid them myself. I told myself it was stress, that everyone had their flaws. But the biggest red flag? The ex. Mark. She mentioned him early on. We dated years ago. It didn't end well, and I didn't push. Then last winter, he started texting her again. "He's going through a rough patch," she said. "I just feel bad for him." I bit my tongue when she met him for coffee. When she came home late, smelling like someone else's cigarette smoke, I swallowed the unease. Trust is love, I told myself. Stupid. Because the woman who kissed me goodbye before work, who curled into me at night like I was her anchor, she was already slipping away, and I was too busy loving her to notice. The first time she mentioned the loan, it was just an offhand comment over dinner. "We should really start building our credit," she said, swirling her wine. "You know, for the future." I nodded, distracted by work emails on my phone. The future, ours together, still felt solid back then. A week later, she brought it up again, this time with paperwork in hand. "It's just a formality," she assured me, sliding a document across the table. "A joint line of credit. It'll help us qualify for a mortgage someday." I should have read the fine print. I should have asked questions, but I trusted her. That's the part that still claws at me. How easy it was for her to exploit that. I signed. For weeks afterward, nothing seemed off. Life went on as usual. Groceries, Netflix, lazy Sunday mornings. Then one evening, she came home buzzing with excitement. "I got us approved," she announced, kissing me on the cheek. "The bank just needs your final authorization. It's basically done." She handed me her phone, an email open on the screen. "Just hit reply and confirm your details. Takes 2 seconds. I hesitated. Something about the way she was watching me, too eager, too focused, made my stomach tighten. But then she smiled, that same smile that had disarmed me from day one, and I pushed the doubt aside. "Yeah, okay," I said, typing out a quick response. "For the future." The money hit the account 3 days later. 100 grand, just sitting there. I didn't even know until she mentioned it casually, like an afterthought. "Oh, by the way, that line of credit went through. We should celebrate." She suggested a weekend getaway. I said yes. That was the last normal conversation we ever had. Because when I came home from work the next day, the house was too quiet. Her keys were on the counter. Her favorite mug, still half full of coffee, sat cold on the table. Upstairs, her drawers were empty. The safe where I kept my passport and social security card, unlocked. Bare. And the money, every last dollar, was gone. I called her, straight to voicemail, texted, no reply. It wasn't until I dug through her desk, hands shaking, that I found the note. Just 3 words scribbled on the back of a receipt. I'm sorry. Goodbye. Underneath it, a single torn photo. Her and Mark, arms around each other, grinning like thieves. The first call came at 6:03 a.m. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the note still clutched in my hand, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. A woman's voice, crisp and professional, asked if I was aware my loan payment was overdue. I laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that made her pause. Sir? She said, and that's when the numbness cracked. There's been a mistake, I told her. I didn't take out a loan. The silence on the other end was worse than shouting. According to our records, she said slowly, you signed for this on the 14th. The funds were deposited into a joint account under your name and Lana Reyes. Reyes. Her maiden name, not mine. Never mine. I hung up and vomited in the sink. By noon, the house felt like a crime scene. I traced the steps of her disappearance like a detective, piecing together the timeline. The way she'd been distant but affectionate those last few days. You've been working so hard, she'd murmured, rubbing my shoulders. Let me handle the bills for a while. The way she'd insisted on driving me to work that week, claiming her car needed gas. Had she been cleaning out the accounts while I sat in meetings? Had she kissed me goodbye that morning, knowing she'd never see me again? The bank statements arrived via email, a digital paper trail of her betrayal. Withdrawals, transfers, a one-way ticket to Miami purchased the day before she vanished. And then, nothing. The account was drained, closed. I called her mother. She's not here, the woman said, her voice tight, and I don't appreciate you harassing us. Click. Her friends? Blank stares. We thought you two were happy, one said, pity in her eyes. Another exhaled smoke through her nose and said, yeah, Mark's been back in town. Guess now we know why. The cops were worse. It's a civil matter, the officer said, shrugging. You signed the papers. Unless you can prove fraud. She stole my identity, I shouted. You gave her access, he corrected. That night, I sat in the dark with a bottle of whiskey and my laptop, digging through every photo, every email, every shred of evidence that the last 3 years hadn't been a lie. I found them, tiny fractures I'd ignored. A second phone number in her contacts labeled Mom. Her real mother's number was saved under Mom's cell. A locked folder on her iPad I'd never noticed. And then, buried in her Google history, a search from 2 months ago. How long does it take to drain a joint account after marriage? The whiskey burned going down. I thought about calling Mark, tracking him down, demanding answers. But what good would it do? They'd won. She'd played me perfectly. And then, as the alcohol blurred the edges of my rage, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the pathetic husband sobbing into his drink. I was going to find her. The first rule of hunting someone who doesn't want to be found: start with what they left behind. I tore through the house like a man possessed, turning over every cushion, emptying every drawer, receipts, old notebooks, the junk mail she always tossed in a basket by the door, anything that might give me a clue. I found a crumpled dry cleaning stub with a Miami address, a coffee shop loyalty card from a place in Fort Lauderdale. March 14th, 2 days before she disappeared. I mapped the locations, cross-referencing them with her last bank withdrawals. Gas stations, an ATM near the Miami airport, a Walmart where she'd bought luggage. Luggage like she hadn't already packed a bag before she kissed me goodbye. Then I remembered the photo. The torn picture of her and Mark, grinning like they'd already won. I smoothed it out on the table, studying his face. I'd never met him, never cared to. Now I zoomed in on every detail: his watch, a cheap Casio, his shirt, a faded Hard Rock Cafe logo, the pier stretching out behind them. A quick Google search told me it was the Hollywood Beach Broadwalk. Bingo. I called in favors. A buddy at work knew a guy who could pull phone records. Another friend had a cousin in Florida who owed him a favor. Within 48 hours, I had a list of numbers linked to Mark's name, and one of them had been active in Hollywood, Florida for the past week. I debated hiring a PI. Then I looked at my bank account, at the wreckage she'd left behind, and decided some things needed to be done in person. I booked a one-way ticket to Miami. The flight was agony. Every minute in the air felt like a minute she was slipping further away. I rehearsed what I'd say when I found her. Did you ever love me? Was any of it real? But the words turned to ash in my mouth. Landing in Florida was like stepping into an oven. Humidity wrapped around me the second I left the airport. I drove straight to the address from the dry cleaning stub, a mid-range apartment complex with palm trees and a pool filled with laughing tourists. I waited. 3 hours in a rental car, sweating through my shirt, watching the entrance, and then there. Mark walked out first, shirtless, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He held the door open for someone behind him, and then she stepped into the sunlight. Lana, my wife. Wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, her hair lighter from the sun, her fingers laced with his. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just watched as they climbed into a convertible and drove away, her laughter trailing behind them like smoke. Now I knew where they were. Now it was time to decide what happened next. I followed them at a distance, my rental car blending with the midday Miami traffic. They didn't hurry, didn't glance behind them. Why would they? As far as they knew, I was still back home, drowning in debt and despair. The convertible pulled into a beachfront restaurant's valet line. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back, the salt air sticking to my skin. Through the restaurant's open patio, I saw them at a corner table, Mark's arm draped over her chair, her leaning into him like she'd never leaned into me. A bottle of champagne sat between them. Celebration or habit? I didn't burst in, didn't make a scene. Instead, I waited by the host stand until a waiter passed with their food, 2 lobster plates expensive, and slipped him a 50. That couple in the corner? Tell her someone named James is here to see her. Her face when she heard my name, that's what I'll remember forever. The color draining from her cheeks, the way her hand jerked, knocking over her champagne flute. Mark turned, following her gaze to where I stood in the doorway. For a long moment, no one moved. Then she stood, smoothing her dress with trembling hands. I'll handle this, she told Mark, her voice barely audible over the clatter of silverware. The hostess led us to a private alcove near the restrooms. The second we were alone, the mask dropped. How did you find you? I finished. My voice surprised me. Calm, almost conversational. You left receipts, Lana, like breadcrumbs. She crossed her arms, shoulders hunched. Not the confident woman who'd emptied my accounts. Just a scared girl caught stealing. It's not what you think. I laughed then, sharp enough to make her flinch. You took $100,000 and vanished with your ex. What exactly am I supposed to think? Her eyes darted toward the dining room where Mark waited. He had debts, dangerous people. I needed to help him. With my money. You weren't supposed to find out so soon. The words burst out, raw and revealing. I had a plan to pay it back once you what? I stepped closer, watching her shrink against the wall. Once you drained my credit too? Once you'd sold the house? A waiter passed by, eyeing us nervously. Lana lowered her voice to a hiss. Just go. I'll send you something when I can, but if Mark sees you here... Mark? I glanced toward the table where her ex was now standing, craning his neck to spot us. You're scared of him? She wouldn't meet my eyes. You don't understand. And suddenly I did. The missing pieces clicked together. Her nervous energy those last weeks, the way she'd jump at sudden noises, the bruises she'd blamed on gym accidents. I'd come for revenge, for answers. But the woman in front of me wasn't the mastermind I'd imagined. Just another victim. albeit one who'd dragged me down with her. Mark's voice cut through the restaurant. "Lana? You good?" She wiped her eyes, straightening up. "I have to go." I could have stopped her, could have called the cops right then. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pressed a folded slip of paper into her hand. "My contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division," I said quietly. "Call her when you're ready to get out." Then I walked away, leaving her standing there, trapped between the monster she'd chosen and the life she'd burned to ashes. The humid Miami night pressed against the rental car windows as I sat in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, the neon sign flickering overhead. My phone buzzed again. Another call from the bank, another voicemail I wouldn't listen to. The two business cards on the passenger seat caught the sickly yellow light, one from Detective Alvarez at Miami PD, who'd promised to have Lana in handcuffs by morning if I gave the word. The other from Sarah Whitman at the FBI, who'd looked at the photos of Lana's fading bruises and said quietly, "She's in over her head, but she's not the real criminal here." I turned the key in the ignition just to get the AC running. The cold air made me shiver. All this rage, and now I was sitting here wondering if turning her in would make me feel any better. I could still see the fear in her eyes when she'd whispered, "You don't understand." Maybe I didn't. Maybe it didn't matter. The waitress inside was refilling coffee cups for the night shift workers. Normal people with normal problems. I envied them. My fingers hovered over the detective's card. One call, and it would be over. The debt might still crush me, but at least she'd pay. Then I thought of the way Mark had gripped her arm when they'd left the restaurant, the way she'd flinched. I picked up the FBI card instead. "Whitman," Sarah answered on the second ring. I took a breath. "She'll need protection." A pause, then softer. "We can do that." I hung up before I could change my mind. The engine purred as I pulled onto the highway, heading north. The sun would be up soon. 6 months later, the notification arrived in a plain white envelope. The FBI had dismantled Mark's operation. Turns out my $100,000 was just pocket change in his Ponzi scheme. Lana testified against him in exchange for immunity. The court ordered restitution, but I'll be lucky to see pennies on the dollar. I moved to a small town upstate where no one asks about the past. The bakery on Main Street has a "Help Wanted" sign in the window most mornings. Sometimes I think about applying. The detective called last week to say Mark got 15 years. Lana, he said, moved to Oregon with a new name. I didn't ask which one. There are still nights I wake up reaching for someone who isn't there. Still mornings when my first thought is to check my balance before remembering it doesn't matter anymore. But the anger? That faded somewhere between Miami and here. I keep the FBI agent's card in my wallet. Not as a reminder of what happened, but as proof that when it came down to it, I chose the kind of man I wanted to be. She took my money, she tried to take my peace, but in the end, I kept both.